Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode, HDC Chat Series with Gil Bash. Thank you for joining us today. We really
Oh,
appreciate
well,
it.
and the listeners should know that we've been preparing for this conversation for weeks now.
Thanks to the technology which erased our recording, now I have the opportunity to do this interview again, and I'm so grateful for your willingness, for a person such as yourself with a busy schedule to find another hour
Well,
to share.
I will speak to that for the listeners. You prepare so much for these conversations and are so passionate about making sure that the guest that you have is able to convey, I'd say, life compelling points. I think the listeners should know that this is not just any old podcast. This is an exceptional podcast where a lot of thought goes into it. And so for me, having gone through the practice run and doing this one, I was thrilled to be in conversation with you.
I'm delighted and honored. And shall we get started by
Let's
your
jump in.
bio, which is absolutely impressive? I'm going to read just a couple lines. Gil Bash is widely recognized as one of the world leading voices in healthcare leadership, digital health, and healthcare transformation. Recently, and that's what got my attention on LinkedIn, you were named one of the 8 global digital health worth following in 2026. You are the chair of Global Health and Purpose at Fin Partners, also the recipient of the PM360 Lifetime Achievement Award, last and not least, author of Healing the Sick Care System, Why
That's it.
People Matter.
Here it is. This
Absolutely.
this isn't the only copy out there. Not to be worried. There are more copies.
Interesting. I do have a copy signed by you right now, but that's not really what caught my attention when I invited you to speak on the HD Chat Series. It was just really cherry on top to find out that you have this wonderful book, and I read some of it, not all of it, I confess. But what I read, I'm going to share it throughout this interview. So let's get started. I'm going to start with public information that you gave me permission to share. And so before we dive into AI and healthcare transformation, I'm going to start with your journey. You have seen war up close and personal by serving as paratrooper and combat medic. Your journey extended to the boardroom and advising some of the world's leading healthcare organization. What experience or experiences shaped the way you think about people, leadership, and healthcare?
That's a really great question. Um, the two experiences that you mentioned, this sort of like battlefield to boardroom situation, actually, they merge. First of all, boardrooms are not battlefields, and business is not a war. When people talk about business in terms of like warlike terms, don't don't. War is war, unfortunately, and work is work, and we shouldn't confuse the two. But what we should never forget, whether it be in conflict or be in business, is that we're dealing with people, people's well-being, people's health, emotional and physical, and also their hopes for a better future. So certainly as a combat medic in an elite unit, whether it was friend or foe, and I was standing before them doing an assessment, I never forgot that I was dealing with a human being. I never forgot the sanctity of life. I never forgot the fact that healing is an international language. It needs no words. It is understood by your look, your touch, the conversation you make, even if they don't understand the words, they understand the tone. So I never forgot that they don't remember what you say, they remember how they felt. And so I've carried that forward into my boardroom experiences where I'm counseling C-suite executives and I'm understanding it's not just the quality of my counsel, it is also how they experience it emotionally. And I don't forget that we're not talking about numbers on a balance sheet. There's two balance sheets on the table. One that's evident, it has numbers on it, and one that's not evident that should be. It's about the well-being of people. And the enterprise is really designed, in my opinion, especially what I do within health, It should be designed to take a look at that balance sheet of people and ask the basic question: are we keeping healthy people healthy? Are we turning people who have illness to health? And that should be the balance sheet of the health industry, first and foremost. The numbers will follow the mission.
Thank you. And I will follow up with this point a little bit later on when we start talking about ROI. But you mentioned one point during today and in our previous conversation when, and I quote you, the sanctity of life, when you said humanity transcends faith, flag, or uniform. That's really, really powerful statement. Can you elaborate just in like less
Yeah.
than a minute?
You know, my book and my life is about the search for mindfulness. And we often act reactively, instinctively, in a way that isn't necessarily helpful. When I talk about the ability to transcend faith or flag or uniform, it's something I had to experience, unfortunately, close up and personal. I don't recommend that as a training ground, but it was my training ground. And suddenly I realized that a human being that is broken, injured badly, is no longer a combatant. They return to another sort of classification. They're not a combatant, neither are they a civilian, but they are a human being. They are a human being that prays that they will survive. And what I don't forget is behind that human being, there's a family. Now, my life has made that real to me because I come from a family where one of my family members, my father's brother, my grandmother, who partially raised me, her son, died in war. And I would go as a child, I'm named after him. I would go as a child to the cemetery on Memorial Day every year with her. Strangely enough, my grandfather never went, my father never went. My youngest uncle, my grandmother, and I would go. And I would watch her spirit drain at the gravesite as she mourned for her son. And I think that was sticky with me. And so when I was in combat and I saw someone injured, I understood that I had training and capacity to help, and that now I had the responsibility to deploy that knowledge to sustain someone's life, and that maybe I would be able to return someone to their home. Conflicts end, and life should continue. And so that really played a very powerful role in that perspective, in that statement I made for you, that it was real life. And as I was being mindful, as you see the smells and the flashes around you, and you see things disappear before your eyes, I said, and I remember exactly what I was thinking at the moment, that person's mother must want him to come home as much as my mother wants me to come home. And it doesn't diminish my thoughtfulness under fire, my ability to perform, or my courage. It means that even in that, I did not lose my humanity. I maintained who I am. And so I think that's really mission critical. And I think that as people involved in the healing industry, and that's whether you're a nurse, a doctor, a pharmacist, an EMT, first aid provider, a lifeguard, or teaching in a classroom, doctors, or people who work in the health system, every single one of us should remember that we're part of a precious community that is centered around making people healthy or sustaining their lives. Every single one of us.
Thank you, Gil, for sharing this very emotional and personal part of your life. As a professor, as a researcher, we share facts. But when I bring people like you, and that's the reason I have this podcast, you bring soul to it rather than quantitative and qualitative data. So I'm extremely grateful, and so are, I'm sure, the audience of professionals, executives, as well as our students. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
I'm going to move to something less emotional, but not so much less. You started the introduction of the book. Once I got it, the first word or the first sentence in the intro starts with, Houston, we have a problem. And of course, everybody thinks about the to be NASA's third lunar landing, but that
Yeah.
was really provocative. That grabbed my attention. How does it relate into collaboration, to healthcare, to AI? By you started with such strong statement.
Yes, and I recount the what happened essentially, just to give our listeners some background. Apollo 13, an oxygen tank exploded on the capsule. It disabled essentially the module, and they lost heating, they lost some steering capacity. Pretty much the major systems of the space capsule shut down, were not functional. And yet I say there was one system that was still fully functional, the communication system. Had that communication system gone down, there would have been no way that they would have been able to communicate those words back to Mission Control. Houston, we have a problem. Now, that's one part of it. They were able to communicate back and forth with each other. They were communicating. The other aspect was back at Mission Control, they had to sort of say, okay, they need to fix this enough to get home. That became the mission, get them home. Not going to the moon, get them home. And so they put everything that they had in that capsule on a table and put the engineers who knew that spaceship from different standpoints. Somebody knows software, someone knows hardware, someone knows the structure of the capsule. They're all in a room together, and they have to figure out how to kind of band-aid that capsule and get home and keep these three men alive. Collaboration. Try to imagine if they said, no, I think we should use only duct tape, more duct tape. The problem is not enough duct tape. Try to imagine, another guy said, no, they have to tighten more bolts, bolt tightening. That will be it. Well, that's how medicine works, by the way, right? I don't do knees. I just do hip replacement, right? That's how medicine. I don't do lower GI any longer. I just do upper GI, esophageal disease. I'm not a lower GI. I don't do colon. I do esophageal disease. And that's what I don't do general cardiology any longer. I'm an interventionalist. I'll give you a stent, or I'm an electrophysiologist. I'll stop your arrhythmia. Medicine is getting so specialized and specialized that we're seeing it through the lens of that specialization. We don't see a person any longer. Pretty much you're just a rotator cuff, right? Ready to be operated on. How you feel about it, what's going on in your life, no, that's not my interest. I'm just interested in getting in there and working on your rotator cuff. So I bring that out, and I end that section with saying healthcare, we have a problem because essentially we're in that capsule together, right? Health professionals, patients, administrators, payers, policymakers. And the one thing that's not working, and I say this in just in the book, had had their situation been like the medical system, NASA would have had to call up the White House and just say, this is our solution for getting them home. And it would go through a whole bunch of faceless administrators who knew nothing about this, making decisions about those three astronauts' lives. They would have been dead, right? And I said, that's the problem we're having right now. We've gotten so bureaucratic and specialized simultaneously. Healthcare, we have a problem. And that's why I began it that way, because it parallels the exact situation. We are lost in space.
And we're only at question one. And I have I'm stuttering. Gil, this is what you're doing to me, and I can talk for 3 hours straight. Look, the impact you have on one single person, and definitely on other people listening, and of course in your surrounding. Um, my next question: you have a front row seat to healthcare leadership for decades. What still surprises you today?
Now, that's a powerful question. What surprises me is that none of the system, whether it's the health innovation system, digital health, health information, pharmaceuticals, biotech, the newer gene therapies, medical devices, provider systems, policymakers, we don't share a common metric of success. So for some parts of the system, it's the shareholder. If you think of big companies, they have to say, look, we better make the shareholder happy. We're not going to have these jobs. For policymakers, it's the electorate. I got to do things that the people who sent me to the state capitol or DC, feel like I'm sending them money. I'm down on spending. Those freeloaders who have Medicaid, they shouldn't get it for free. They should work 80 hours a month, even though some of them are single mothers with 3 children. How are they going to get childcare for their 3 children and work 80 hours a month for minimum wage? Nobody thinks that through. And oh, by the way, they get sick. About the payers who are making decisions and forgetting, wait a minute, you and I and of your listeners pay for health insurance. In theory, because we pay for health insurance and our employers may contribute to that as well, in theory, we should be customers of those payers. But no, we're called beneficiaries, which translates you're benefiting from what we give you. And those people, when our doctors call and say, look, this person needs a rotator cuff surgery, are saying, no, not 6 weeks of PT. Well, they can't use the arm. 6 weeks of PT. Can I do an MRI at least? No, 6 weeks of PT. We're not customers, and the doctor has now become an administrator trying to argue away for the who has no use of their arm because of the rotator cuff, is arguing with the system, many times not even a doctor, to get you the medical care that you pay for. And when we take a look at the patient is essentially wandering on their own. They need to advocate for themselves. They need to find good doctors who can advocate. We have a system that's made up of pillars. None of them share a common metric. That surprises me still. And I do, in the book, give a suggestion, a common metric that I think we should share. We should share certainly how are you doing financially. We should share how is your stock. They can have how's your stock as their metric. That's nothing wrong with that. We need a sustainable system, a profitable system to make innovation possible. I'm 100% for it. However, we should all share the metric of patient experience. So what I do write about in other places is if you're a health inventor and you've invented something magnificent that can sustain and save lives, you're also responsible for the friction that invention creates. Now, you may say, well, I'm not responsible for the payer's decision. I'm not responsible for the policy of Medicare and Medicaid. I'm not responsible for that. I'm just responsible for this molecule that can save lives. Well, guess what? The molecule that can save lives isn't saving lives if it's not available. If you can't access it as the patient, how is it saving your life? It's not. So I think that we have to look at patient experience as the shared metric of the system. And it surprises me still we don't have a common way to evaluate, are we being successful on the part of why we are created or develop or invent in the first place. We are to help people live longer, healthier, happier lives. That's an experiential thing as well. So I would start there. That's the first surprise. Like, come on, we're all trying to do the same thing. Can we sit at the table and sort of say, hey, we all are going to be evaluated one day by people's experience?
Let's further this evaluation in these metrics. My current area of research as a researcher, and I share with you, it's the real ROI of AI. That's what I'm focusing on right now. And I even named season 2, the HDC Chat Series, the same thing, the real ROI of AI. So this is where I focus on how we measure when we interject AI into this healthcare system. How do we measure AI success? And you started talking about these metrics. And the first one, and I think even in your book, the first one that comes is cost savings, even profit. And I hate to use that term, financial returns, I should probably say, efficiency. How do we focus on measures that really matter?
So,
with the use of AI, of course.
Yeah, I showed you recently, I was very privileged that my book was chosen as one of the 6 books Eric Topol's books are there. Tom Larry's books are there. Others great authors are there. And my book appears as one of the books people should read if they're interested in AI and health, because I take it from a very different standpoint, which is the human aspects of AI. AI is magnificent. Is it perfect? No. Either is human judgment, by the way. AI is nothing more than curated information. So since we're wrong good part of the time, AI is going to be wrong a good part of the time. It's merely a reflection of that. And also, science is advancing sometimes before AI is accumulating that new information. So if science is having a breakthrough today, doesn't necessarily mean AI has sort of curated that information yet and can put it out in the correct way. So AI is a tool, like your stethoscope is a tool, like your thermometer is a tool, like an MRI is a diagnostic tool. It's a tool. Now, like everything, it depends on how we govern that tool, how we lead the tool. It's not a tool that is left to its own devices. In medicine, we have a responsibility because things are used, decisions will be made that will impact people's well-being. So we have to have governance over the use of AI in health, and institutions have to do it. It's not the Wild West. Now, most doctors are using AI in a vigilante way. It's right? It's a tool. Doctors can't remember everything. And they use AI. Now, it could be right, it could be wrong. That's fine. They should check it out. Nothing wrong with that. Here's my big issue with AI. It's a huge time saver. I mean, doctors shouldn't have to remember every aspect of physiology after they went to medical school, and you can't remember every single possible treatment for every single possible condition. AI can spark memory. All true. It will accelerate things. However, what will be done with that time saved? That's my question in the book. So we can say, this is wonderful. AI saves you, the clinician, 45 minutes a day. It's fantastic. Now we could say that 45 minutes saved, spend a little more time with the patients who need you. Make sure they understand their instructions so they can take better care of themselves. Or spend a little time with them making a referral to another doctor who may help them with an issue such as diet or mental health. But probably what will happen is someone in the system will say, this is fabulous. Generally, our doctors only see 16 patients a day. We can squeeze in another 2 patients. That's going to improve our ability to send data out to the payers, be reimbursed, and improve our margins. Now, those are the 2 paths we can take. Spend more time, help people be healthier, or, hey, shove in another patient or 2. I won't answer the question for the listeners. I'll let them make their own assumption. However, this is the big thing with AI. It's an efficiency tool. It's a knowledge curating tool, absolutely. But deployed, why do we use it? Well, if you're a dingbat and you can't put 3 words together, that's one reason to use AI. It can put 3 words together. I'm not saying they're the right words, but it will put them together. But if you're really good at it, and the Harvard Business Review articles say, if you're really, really cognitively and technically, and you know how to use the right prompts in AI, you can get a lot more effective work done in the course of a day. If you're not really great at your job, you're still going to be not really great at your job. In other words, AI doesn't make a bad doctor a great doctor. It's a bad doctor, an even badder doctor. What can I say? So if you don't know what to ask, then you're going to get the result. So AI is not the solution. It is a facilitator of solutions. So my big question is, how is it going to be used? To enable this health professional, nurse, doctor, pharmacist, to spend a little more time with those that need that time? Or, hey, be busier. And that's what I write about in terms of AI. However, I'll stay with this AI topic for a bit. My issue is when WebMD came out and patients started to go on to WebMD, and WebMD was the most trusted source in medicine. It's no surprise that Dr. John White, who is the chief medical officer of WebMD, is now the head of the American Medical Association. Not surprising at all, based on who he is and how he works. Brilliant man who cares a lot about patient care. And by the way, when he was chief medical officer of WebMD, he continued to see patients. The is doctors are not trained sufficiently or at all to deal with people, patients. They're trained on medicine, they're trained on physiology, they're trained on pharmacy, they're trained on EMRs even, but they're not necessarily trained to deal with patients. There's no semester-long course of dealing with the hard of hearing patient or the frightened patient. No course. And if we added all the courses that doctors should have today, we'd have to add another year to medical school. Not feasible. Or we could reprioritize in the certain time we have, maybe. But a patient who comes in after exploring all their symptoms on AI often is met with who are you going to believe? Me or AI? Or I'm the doctor here. Let me handle this first. Because the moment, not all, many doctors sling a stethoscope around their neck, something begins to change in some, not in some, which is the authoritative voice. My book, I talk about that. I do explore that. And I say the patient who comes in with WebMD or Dr. Google or whatever the case might be, that is a gold star patient for a doctor who really is focused on patient care. Because I think the first question should be, awesome, tell me what you found. Tell me what you put in. Tell me what you found. Let's explore that. Because the patient is curious, is trying to get to information, is probably going to be a much more adherent patient if you bond with them. But a lot of doctors don't want to do that. And so if the medicine, again, what I talked about, if it's about patient experience, the doctor's going to acknowledge the patient. I'm so thrilled you're looking into this. Was it out of concern? Was it out of curiosity? Trying to help me? And the moment that patient comes in and says, well, I was frightened. I saw the symptoms first. When I read, Claude, I felt a little assured that it wasn't like the big C. It could be something else. So the doctor could say, look, let's go through our exam first. That's tell us if Claude is right or not. Let's do that first. But you've given us a lot to think about. Let's get to the bottom of this together. Does the doctor do that? Question mark. But that also deals with the other thing I said, which is, does the system give the physician sufficient time to have that sort of relationship with the patient?
You're giving me so much to think about, and I have at least three questions, but one is a rebuttal, and the next one I'm gonna ask. So when you said more classes dealing with patient and talking about the emotional part, there are just so many credits. Our medical students and aware that I have a joint appointment at the medical school. However, at Quinnipiac University, I'm going to do shout out, of course, to my organization. We have electives, and the class they take with me is AI in healthcare. We have electives or specialization in healthcare management, which is more geared toward
Right.
the patient and the people. So that aside, and shout out, of course, to my university. In our last talk, you mentioned, and I love it when you mention examples, the one about friction and the one about Peter Pan. So if you can weave those into leadership
Not in
governance.
my book. That came up.
No, we talked
That's a
about
great
it last
example.
time. I loved
AI,
it.
AI is really an expression of humanity. And even it's built or structured. When you go into AI and it gives you an answer and you say, that's not right. I know it's not right. And you say, that's incorrect. Data shows it's this, blah, 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 blah. AI responds and says, you're right. And then, that's a program. AI isn't saying, oh my goodness, I missed that one. Sorry about that, bud. You're right. So that you don't get frustrated with it and you feel acknowledged and ask again. You stay with it. But AI is not a human being. AI is humanity's information curated within the system. That's all it is. The wealth of knowledge essentially inventoried within AI. So Peter Pan, if you remember, everybody should remember, Peter Pan and his lost boys visit Wendy, or Peter Pan, and eventually he gets into a conversation with her. She has three brothers, so she understands Peter Pan. She feels probably protective of him. And what does Peter Pan want? He's been separated from his shadow, right? There's the original Peter Pan
That's
and the
right.
shadow of Peter Pan. And he feels bereft that this shadow is disconnected with him. It doesn't move with him. It's just a shadow, the shadow. And he says to Wendy, could you sew it back onto me? And so she does. And he's beyond thrilled and offers to take her and her brothers to Never Never Land, which is where we are right now in this health system. We're in Never Never Land. The is AI is not a deity. It is an information bank. And so I will date myself to my graduate school period where we had punch cards, lots of IBM punch cards, and we carried them around in boxes or suitcases with rubber bands, of course, and double rubber banded. Heaven forbid they should be out of order. And we would run the data. If a punch card or two, the data was incorrectly punched on the card, the output would be incorrect. And we understood that was so important to check and double check. Same thing with AI. AI can run possibilities through very rapidly, and it can run very good possibilities through if the data it's evaluating, it's curating and assessing is correct. Peter Pan understood that this was a shadow. He enjoyed the shadow, but he also understood it was merely a pale sense of him. AI is not humanity. It is essentially big data with machine learning. Remember that once upon a time, big data? I'd be interviewed and people would say, what's big data? And I said, that's a great question. Big data is a lot of data. And then later on, they'd say, can you tell us what machine learning is? I'd say, absolutely. It's big data being processed through a machine so that we can get insight. Now we call it augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. How can you have artificial intelligence unless it's a robot giving over its experience? It's our experience, our history being dumped into a mammoth machine processing information. So we have to be careful to remember we're Peter Pan, it's our shadow, and it's connected to us, but the shadow doesn't have independent action from us. Maybe one day it will. That's what we're frightened about, right? And then we can really find out if Matrix exists or not at that point.
Thank you for tying this story to both collaboration to governance of our system, which is one of the takeaway from this one. The right now, whether our new graduate students or people already in industry, AI job is the term that we use AI in the future of work, especially in healthcare. And there is this misconception or true conception that AI may be a job killer. What's your take about this conception of AI's job displacer or a job killer?
So it's both, not for the right reasons, not for the right reasons. Certainly, throughout time, innovation has replaced jobs. When the first horseless buggy hit the street and the blacksmith looked at it and laughed hysterically, they never imagined that suddenly we'd be driving cars down highways and they would have fewer horses to shod. There's still some blacksmiths, by the way, because people still have horses, but it's an art, not necessarily a competitive industry. So innovation does replace positions. I easy pass on my car. I have seen someone collecting my quarters in those booths are empty. Where do they all go? They were assigned other positions, quite honestly. So Sometimes we're freed up to imagine and invent. But in AI's case, where Elon Musk talks about this as a job, certainly other people do, the the ability that some jobs will be converted into other roles. But what we're seeing is AI is about knowledge applied. So people who are very skilled, knowledgeable, relationships, a lot of our industry is service based. So if you look at service-based, I don't think that your students will enjoy sitting in front of a emoji, teaching them health informatics or medicine, in front of the class and at a screen where a character is being created, and to get students' attention, suddenly it grows long ears and grows back again, so you're paying attention. I think that the relationship between the teacher and the student is very important. And that's what we call mentorship. And that mentorship is a very real connective tissue of the role model. So is it a job killer? Yes. Now, why is it a job killer right now? When I speak to people, it's not that jobs should be killed. It's that for some industries, Wall Street expects reduction of headcount. Companies may say, I don't need reduction of headcount, but my shareholders expect reduction in headcount. I'll get rid of people. So part of it is meeting the street's expectation, not necessarily the company's need. And so we have to be careful not to knee jerk around this job killer thing because it's supposed to kill jobs. And so we react. Now, I see a lot of companies sometimes kill jobs because of we're going to streamline, we're going to do this. And I see often those same companies hire back tons of people 2 years later. So what is it? Job killer, job creator? We're too early in the stage to figure that out. And also what we're finding out, and there's a great article in this week's New York Times about this, AI is not exactly all that it's cut out to be. And so we have to be careful not to jump before we looked. And they say, look before you leap. We're leaping before we look. We have to be very careful about that right now. The other aspect is you need to have humans double check AI because AI admits it's wrong and says you're right. So the last thing we need is an AI that is diagnosing patients, and suddenly it's not right. So we're still at the stage of this is very early. It's very early. AI is not the solution to all problems. It's nifty. It's cool. Don't go too fast. Check it out. And that's why we need governance, especially in the health sector.
A common message that I keep hearing from successful leaders, such as yourself, is don't go fast or don't do it if it's not needed, instead of just jumping into it.
Well, I think it's needed, though. I think AI is needed. I think that what is worrisome is the independent use of AI in health systems, because you can create a large language model that deals with your community needs. It's designed for your community. Using a standard, and I give example of research. I think like there are tools like BRIA, which is used in sort of like research aspects that can probably shave half a year, maybe a year off of creating research models. But there are AI models like that are being created specific purposes, and those are helpful. But general widespread use of AI in the medical system, that's worrisome. That's worrisome, and we have sort of bumper guards around that. We shouldn't just use it. We should understand. And that's why I don't think, with all due respect in the health system, I don't necessarily think that the chief technology officer, chief information officer is in the driver's seat here. I think it has to be someone with a medical background who's trained in informatics. And I'm seeing more of that. Microsoft has Kathleen McGraw on staff. She's a PhD nurse, doctoral nurse, who's in health informatics, for instance. We need more of those. And I do think it's going to have to find them or create them and put them in positions of influence.
I'm going to put a pause on that one. We maybe have to pick it up offline. who should, but I'm going to open it actually to the audience to ponder on that. Should we train, probably train is not the correct term, have the medical and the clinicians be more knowledgeable about AI so they can leverage it better, knowing the contacts and the medical profession? Or should we have AI experts that understand the limitations and the power of AI, learn more about the context, whether it's healthcare, whether other industries? Not for you and I to answer, but probably put it out there
Yeah, I
as a
look,
call.
I'm not saying is the vote should be passed on AI use in the health system. I will say I take a very human perspective on technology, and technology is not separate from us. It's an extension of us. And I think we have to understand our responsibility in using that extension. And when we're dealing with human life, I think we have to also understand the value of information. I will give an example from my book. In my book, I talk about my daughter with her permission. She's 32 years old and she has a rare disease. And I talk about how different doctors evaluate information. I'm not even talking about use of AI, just like the
Yeah.
medical file, and how some doctors are just, I'll use this term, dead wrong. No, and another doctor who's more expansive, more imaginative about the data is spot on. So now try to imagine the dead wrong doctor being armed with AI, answers and stays on course because that's their inclination and what the data say, and they're not really looking at this. And this is why they say in medicine, doctors are trained to look at horses when they hear hoofbeats, and sometimes it's a zebra. And so AI is necessarily going to help us with the zebras, though it may. And so that's why we need to train physicians to understand the power of and limitations of AI. They need to understand that.
Thank you for the clarification and for, if I heard you correctly, this human AI centered collaboration where we keep the human there, but we leverage, we augment it with the powers of AI that could provide us better healthcare to you and I, and the rest of everybody. I know I'm using your time at the end of it, but I'm going to go to this point, which is critical about the workforce where you said the street expectations, and I'm not paraphrasing you. The What's going on is small teams are performing, or maybe performing as much, not better, as big teams, and that's what we see sometimes. Some of the let go of large number of experts because the assumption, and it is true in certain instances, but we've seen big companies that just let go of a huge percentage of their workforce. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So why you can say, why are we letting go those people? Were they not valuable? Did they not have knowledge or experience? Does the machine actually, supplement or replace their ability? These are very important questions. And we have to understand, as I said earlier in our conversation, there are two distinct balance sheets that are going on here that we've not yet come to terms with. One is the financial balance sheet, financial expectations of the government or investors. The other aspect is, why does society exist? I mean, our industry, the health industry, about the preservation of humanity, the sanctity of humanity. And so when we take a look at this, we have to understand that we don't invent in order to harm. We have to invent in order to help. And so
Yeah.
business leaders have to really take a look at this from a purpose-centered standpoint. And what I don't see enough of conversation going on, not just in the health industry, but in all industry, is what is the purpose of all this? Is it so that there'll be the Nasdaq will climb, New York will climb, the London exchange will climb. Well, certainly we like that. We want prosperity. But if we're creating prosperity on one hand and creating poverty on the other, we're not creating prosperity, because the prosperity of some will have to be redeployed to sustain and save people from the poverty that they're suffering from. And that's what I deal with in the book. I won't go into the economics of all this, but I talk about the fact that we kick the can down the road, and at some point we will hit a dead end. So when I take a look at our Medicaid situation, people need health insurance. People who are below the poverty line get sick, just like wealthy people get sick. But wealthy people generally have health insurance and the ability to also go out of pocket and get better care. People with
Yeah.
Medicaid is a safety line. If you're using Medicaid, you need health care. And so when we don't take care of those people, where do they end up? They end up in the emergency room, and the
Yeah.
emergency room cannot deny them care. So the emergency room provides them with basic patch them up care and puts them out there. What does the hospital do with the bill? It either goes out of business, hospitals go out of business, believe it or not, or
Yeah.
sends it up to the state for some sort of negotiated reimbursement. Sends it up to the state. Who pays for that? The state budget. Who pays the state budget? You and me. So when we take a look at impoverished nations or regions, we have to remember that actually someone's poverty is shared by a humane society. So I would just say this is where bold policy decision makers have to say, let us use AI in a way that accelerates our knowledge and ability. Let us use people's talent and ability so that it's for the good of society. It's not one or the other. We can't have one or the other, because we will actually be using AI in a way that is detrimental, similar to AI that goes amok and decides to call it a sort of a bomb attack on another nation because it's misprogrammed. We can't let AI bomb attack the economy of nations. That's not going to either. But I just deal with the AI in medicine. I don't have to worry about the geopolitical aspect of what's going to happen between this capital and that capital. I would just say, for patients, people, we're always people, sometimes patients. And I remind doctors, guess what? I've not met anyone in all my years who got out of life alive. So doctors will be patients. Treat people as you would want to be treated. Set the example as a role model. And so I would just say the best way to start is understanding an inquisitive patient is an awesome patient.
Thank you for making the people, the person, the center of this entire conversation. We talked about technology, policy, governance, and everything around the healthcare system, but you, the patient, at the center of every single question, every single comment, every single interjection. So thank you for that message to my student, to the leaders out there to listening to this podcast. I have one last question because your book just came out a couple months ago, so fairly recent. Anything just in the last couple months, any shockers, anything new you would add, you would have added, or you would like to add to your book?
Yeah, I've traveled all around the world on book tours, and one of the most heartwarming things that I've encountered is when I read a little passage. Maybe I'll end with just reading a little snippet from the book. The is to see people in the audience crying, doctors, people with health conditions, and so forth crying. And I'm sitting out there, and they're sitting in front of me. They don't necessarily see each other quietly, sob or have tears. I see that. That is a surprise. I imagined that I would pen something that would bring up so many feelings from people, whether it's doctors, whether it's new patients, as I said before. That's surprising. What I would have done, I said this at home last night, so many people have shared stories with me that I feel are so powerful. My regret is that I didn't have more time to collect more stories and bring them into the book, because what readers have said consistently is that they really love the book and they really love the stories. There's an expression someone said that some people tell stories to put people to sleep. I tell stories to wake them up. And that's what I think the stories did in the book. They really woke people up to the reality of the situation we're facing. And hopefully, I feel, and I say in the book, we could change it tomorrow. We could change it tomorrow. What the book calls for is rebuilding a health system that remembers our humanity. It requires empathy, it requires listening, it requires collaboration. Those aren't innovation, those are behaviors, values that we've got to call upon. And if we could have more empathy for people, improve our listening skills, and collaborate as patient and physician, as physician with health team, I'm confident that people would feel better cared for, and we'd have more efficiency. And yes, we would have reduced cost.
What is your next moonshot?
Boy, that's a question I didn't expect. I I really passionately believe. Well, next moonshot is I'm heading off to the Ukraine, and I'll be there for 10 days, and I'll be writing about public health issues as a way of getting people to understand. They read a lot about politics and war. What I tend to write about is impact on people. Last year I was there, I was watching 90-year-old people, some 90-year-olds who had been in World War II as children, collecting firewood for their apartments. So we have to remember when the heating grid, when the energy grid goes down, you have elderly people living in now walk-ups, no elevators, and those people need heat, they need water. And so I write about the fact that, hear about, is Ukraine holding the line against Russia? It is, thankfully. But I also write not about what's happening in Kyiv, but what's happening in villages as people try to survive the winter. My next moonshot is to bring a human face to hostility and to understand that all people seek to live side by side, sane people, good people, side by side in peace. And it's not an impossibility. That's my particular message to Gen Z, that don't give up hope.
I want to conclude this wonderful interview. You started it by a shout out to this podcast, which I'm grateful. You saw value and what's bringing to the students, to the policy, to the healthcare, to the clinicians. So this question is for them. What's one word of advice that you shared throughout this interview? What's one or advice that you would challenge them to reflect on?
Simply stay focused on the purpose of the health system. Stay focused on the purpose of the health system. It is designed to sustain and save people's lives, which means you engage people. They have lives, they have experiences, they have hopes and aspirations. If you're involved in the system, stay focused on what matters. I'll perhaps conclude with reading this paragraph.
Yeah, please do. Looking forward.
Health is both a business and a mission. Let's flip that notion for a moment. When you see the health system first as a mission, it still demands structure and resources. It requires equipment and medicines, investment in innovation, training, and educating people, and making smart, sometimes difficult decisions where need is greatest. The mission and the business are inseparable. So why is the mission so often sidelined?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, we're going to end with a fun note. Let's finish with the HDC rapid fire. Coffee or tea?
Coffee, hands down.
All right, one book everyone in healthcare should read.
Aside from my book,
Yes,
I would say,
course.
look, if you have two books to read, I would say read Tom Lowry's AI in Health. Tom Lowry, Lowry. Tom actually wrote the foreword to my book. But if you have two books to buy, include mine as well.
Okay, right. What's one quality every healthcare leader needs in the age of AI?
Empathy, 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 empathy. That will encourage you to learn. That will encourage you to ask. That will encourage you to listen. That will encourage you to contemplate what you got from AI and decide, does it apply here? And can you use it in a constructive way? Empathy.
Complete the following sentence. Healthcare will truly transform
when we remember that we're always people, sometimes patients.
What's one daily habit that's been essential to your success?
I would actually say meditation, mindfulness.
Thank you so much. This ends our wonderful interview that we will post soon, and 2 more conversations like this or on campus. Of course, you're invited.
I'm looking forward to the invitation and meeting everybody. It would be great.
Thank you so much, Gil.
Bye-bye.
Disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the organization or entity represented by the presenter.